I think we'll get started. It's a couple minutes after 2 Eastern time. Good afternoon to everybody in Eastern time, and good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. We are really glad you joined us today. My name is Mark Pinsky. I am the founding partner of CDFI Friendly America, a new venture that I started with Adina Abramowitz earlier this year to try to bring the $220 million CDFI industry to underserved communities across the nation. Last week at a webinar that some of you participated in and that was sponsored by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, we had two panels of people working on CDFI friendly strategies, reporting on how it's working for them. And in just a few minutes, Adina Abramowitz, my partner, will recap that conversation. Today, we want to explore with you in more detail what CDFI friendly means, how it works, and how your community might use it to increase the supply of flexible, affordable CDFI financing where you need it. First, though, I know that some of you may not be familiar with CDFIs, so let me offer a brief introduction to CDFIs. CDFIs are private financial intermediaries that are dedicated entirely to benefiting low-income, low-wealth, and other under-resourced communities, including communities of color. In the United States today, there are more than 1,100 CDFIs, and they do great work. They currently manage, as we know, as you can see, more than $220 billion, and they work in all 50 states in urban, rural, and native communities. They provide flexible and affordable financing for small businesses, for nonprofits, for real estate development, for quality affordable housing, and for consumers. But CDFIs are not always working in more than 10,000 communities in the United States, often, but not always, smaller market communities and communities of color. Adina and I created CDFI Friendly America to help those underserved communities bring CDFI financing into their communities. As you will hear, our approach is inclusive, collaborative, and sometimes challenging. Our agenda today, what we're going to try to cover is we're going to recap the event that we had on September 30th, sponsored by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. We're going to try and answer questions you may have come in with and questions that may come up for you as we go along. And I'll just say, if you could enter your questions into the chat, it'd be the easiest way for us to respond to them. Then we want to pivot, and we're going to aim to do this around 2:30, depending on the conversation. And we want to give you a closer look at how CDFI Friendly America actually works. We work in 4 phases, and we want to explain that to you. And we're going to guess that you may have some more questions. So we will allow some more time for some conversation. And we will conclude talking about next steps and how to move forward if you want to learn more. So let's get started. The housekeeping notes for today are, first, we are recording this Zoom event, and just so please note that. Second, as I said, if you can post any questions in the chat, we'll do our best to respond to all of them, and we'll try to follow up on those that we can't answer that we think need an answer. And third, at the end of this call, we'll provide you with our contact information so you can be in touch with us when you're ready, and we would love to hear from you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adina. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Mark, and it's a pleasure to be here today. A week ago or so, we had a session with the about CDFI Friendly with the New York Federal Reserve Bank, and about many hundred of people, like about 400 people were on at various points in time. And we talked about, basically, we had 2 panels. The first one was about CDFI Friendly today, and the second one was about the potential for CDFI Friendly in the future. Just to be real quick about it, there are 2 CDFI Friendly communities today. We're working on several others. And these are communities that decided they needed CDFI capital for a bunch of different needs. It could be affordable housing, it could be small business, it could be individual consumer needs. And instead of setting up their own CDFI, they thought it was more efficient to go the CDFI Friendly model, which is a model where after a set of community organizing and education efforts and business planning efforts, we go through a process to create a small nonprofit that has a person and a small credit enhancement fund. The job of the person is to be like a broker between different communities, between the CDFI community and the potential borrower community. and also to bring deals as appropriate to banks or groups of financing institutions. And it also has a credit enhancement fund, which allows them, the community, to have skin in the game in specific deals, and to also help the CDFIs who are maybe not as familiar with the particular issues in a given community get over their last hump of being able to get a deal done. So we heard in our first panel, we heard from Mayor John Hamilton of Bloomington, Indiana. He is the mayor of the first city that created a CDFI-friendly community, Bloomington, Indiana, which is a part college, it's a gown in town kind of community where there's 50,000 students and 35,000 residents. And they found a specific need around affordable housing. Then we heard from Ramel Taylor, who's the chair of the board of CDFI Friendly South Bend. That's the second CDFI friendly community that we've created. And finally, we heard from Mark McDaniel of Senair. Senair is the CDFI that has put the most money into CDFI friendly deals. And we also heard from them about more deals in their pipeline that are happening as a result of CDFI friendly. In the second panel, we heard from Dan Betancourt of Community First Fund, which is a CDFI in Central PA that has worked in a lot of these small communities, not with the CDFI friendly model, with the CDFI going city by city model. And probably he has some of the most experience, their organization has some of the most experience and the most in-depth analysis of what it takes to serve a small community, a small city, a small community. We also heard from Dan Latondra of Bank of America, who has been a bank that has really supported CDFI friendly. And finally, from Christina Brooks from the city of Fort Worth, Texas, which is considering the process of becoming CDFI friendly. So one of the things that we heard that I found the most interesting is how CDFIs are a win-win, both for cities and for CDFIs. For cities, it's kind of obvious. They get capital in their community that they otherwise wouldn't get. And the best example of that so far, CDFI Friendly Bloomington, which has been in operation for over a year, brought in 5 times as much capital in 1 year as they have in the past 12 years. So 5 times as much capital in 1 year, 15.8 million, as they had in the last many, many years. And the total investment due to those 15.8 million of CDFIs was over almost 30 million. They've worked with 7 different CDFIs, and they've developed 166 affordable homes, either created or renovated as a result of this activity. They've also worked with small businesses. We also learned how cities were able to pivot and take advantage of these relationships during COVID, specifically in the city of South Bend. The city was able to set up an emergency loan fund and then grant fund, and also work with CDFIs on PPP loans, all of which would not have been possible but for that connector device of the CDFI friendly relationship that we had with Acción and with Bankable and with some of the other CDFIs that are in the area. But one of the things I learned was that it's also a huge advantage to CDFIs. Mark McDaniel told us how investors and funders are more confident in doing a deal when there's a CDFI friendly relationship in existence, when it's not just another town that nobody's heard of and nobody's ever been to, but it's a community that's been organized, that has CDFI knowledge, that has CDFI skills. That made his investors and funders much more confident when he started investing in deals. So I personally found that really interesting. So those are some of the highlights that I found in the session last week. And now we'd like to open it up for your questions. So please type questions into the chat. Whatever you want to know about CDFI friendly, nothing is, there is no dumb question. We want to know what you want to know and how we might be able to be helpful in your community.
And while folks are entering or putting questions in, if you have any questions, just want to note that one of the things that made this all possible was that John Hamilton, the mayor of Bloomington, was a founder of City First Bank, a CDFI based in Washington, D.C. And, it might not have been possible without the fact that he had CDFI experience and understood what CDFIs could do and could help the others in the community, from the bankers to the community foundation to the community, understand that. So.
We have our first question. What is the relationship between CDFIs and credit unions? And then a second question, can CDFI Friendly be adapted to rural communities? You want to take the credit one, union one, Mark, and I'll do the rural one?
Absolutely. So there are 4 types of CDFIs, to be clear. 2 of them are depository CDFIs. One is community development banks. The other is community development credit unions. And there are a very large number of community development credit unions, not only in this country, but in the CDFI movement, that are providing basic financial services, transaction services, savings, as well as credit to their members in their community. So community development credit unions, which are focused on serving low-income populations, or primarily low-income populations, are a part of the CDFI universe and play a critical role that no other institutions in the CDFI world can. So I hope that answers the question.
Also, in both Bloomington and in South Bend, we encountered quote unquote regular credit unions that serve communities and are interested in understanding more about the credit needs that we uncovered. And CDFI Friendly definitely refers those appropriate deals to those kind of credit unions. For example, in South Bend, there's Teachers Federal Credit Union and there's Notre Dame Federal Credit Union, both big national credit unions, and they are receiving referrals for mortgage requests through CDFI Friendly. They're the most appropriate institution for that. So as far as rural communities, we have not, currently we've been working in small cities. And we are now working with an expansion of CDFI Friendly South Bend to Elkhart County, which is part rural, part urban. So that'll be our first rural foray. I think the answer is we believe that it can be adapted. We haven't worked in a county or an area that's completely rural yet. We have had requests and talked about how that might be done. I think if it's a rural area, it's helpful if it's a county or a group of counties that have a certain level of population altogether and also have a history of doing, whether it's urban or rural, one of the things we look for is a history of successfully doing public-private partnerships. Because essentially this is a public-private partnership. And that's one of the things we look for is, do the public sector and the private sector agree on what are some of the challenges for low income or underrepresented people? And have they worked on solutions before that have been successful? So if those things are there, then we're interested in checking it out.
And Adina, if I can just note that in Bloomington, one of the questions all along as we were working there and helping them figure out how to go forward was that it is it's a small city in a rural community, and it has since we created it, decided to cover, I think, about a dozen rural communities. They haven't yet been working there, but they understand the need there, as Bloomington is sort of the economic hub of that region. And so there are obviously the existing economic forces mean that the rural communities and the small cities need to work together. And that's got to be part of what we do. So we will learn more about that, we're sure, in South Bend and Elkhart County, as we were sort of discussing. Adina, do you want to pick up a question, or?
So the next questions are, in what ways can a community show they are ready to be CDFI friendly, and how can institutions help CDFIs and CDFI friendly type organizations? And that sort of, I think, goes to our 4 stages of becoming CDFI friendly. So we'll be getting to that in about 15 more minutes. So we're going to hold off on that question and move on to the next one, which is, when allocating financial resources in the community, how does the CDFI friendly model measure leakage rates and undercoverage rates? Are there any records in the CDFI sector to assess how effective these programs have been? So we did look at leakage rates when we were doing our business planning. And we are not allocating resources to a community. This is not a government program. So what we're doing is identifying deals that could not be financed and offering them to CDFIs and seeing if the CDFIs can come to the table and do the financing. So it's a little bit different than allocating resources that you would do in a government type program. We're just trying to make, basically we're trying to make the free market be more accessible and fairer to more people. And that should decrease both leakage rates and undercoverage rates. If I didn't answer the question, please feel free to write in again.
And what I want to add about that is, and we'll get more into this in a few minutes when we do get into the model, our effort is really based around simply making the connection and helping both sides in the transactions make the connection. So we look very much to CDFIs, which we know are very good at what they do, to sort of make sort of market allocation decisions, if you will. And we ask the community to really be able to identify what its primary financing needs are and whatever might be different or idiosyncratic about them. So it's really creating that conversation that we hope results in, you know, targeted and effective use of resources.
So then there's another question about affordable housing projects. Can CDFIs be part of the 25% equity or the 75% construction debt? The answer to that is yes and yes. CDFIs can definitely be part of any stage of an affordable housing project. CDFI loan funds in particular often participate in pre-development, in acquisition and construction, sometimes in permanent financing, and many of them will go up to 90% loan to value. It's a little rarer to see CDFIs participate in the equity side, but there are CDFIs like Sinair that do both. They do LIHTC equity syndication, they do debt. So yes and yes.
And Adina, there's a question about, are there online resources to better understand CDFI friendly model? Thank you for asking. You know, it's a new model, so we are trying to share as we learn what we're learning and how to do it. But at our site, which is CDFIFriendlyAmerica.com, you can find out a little bit of the basics, but we also developed a white paper that sort of explains the model and the theory that it works by, and includes case studies of both of the existing CDFI friendly communities in Bloomington and in South Bend. So that's a good place to start. After that, we're gonna create it together because it's still an emerging concept. We are very, as Adina noted earlier, we are very encouraged by what's happened, not only in Bloomington, where the amount was 5 times what they had done over 15 years actually was, but also in South Bend, where the CDFI friendly entity was created right before COVID shut everything down. Adina mentioned they were able to pivot and provide substantial help in bringing CDFIs in to help small businesses, particularly small businesses that weren't able to take advantage of the PPP program, and to sort of keep them connected. And building on that, we've learned that it's taken on a bit of a life of its own, and there are more CDFIs now that have come into South Bend and are already starting to do financing there. And we're confident that the numbers there will be high. Just to give you an idea, in Bloomington, Bloomington had really imagined it might be able to do $40 or $45 million over 5 years. It's done $15 million in its first year and expects to do another 15 to 20 in its second year. So it's well ahead of the goals, which seemed frankly outlandish to the people in Bloomington when we first were setting them, because they didn't know how CDFIs work. And in South Bend, where the focus is much more on small businesses, the numbers were lower, but it was $17 million over 3 years, and we'll see how that goes. But they've done about $700,000 in financing to small businesses despite COVID or because of COVID so far. So.
Another question that was posted is, are there things that CDFI Friendly is doing to help increase CDC or local developer capacity in order to facilitate redevelopment and bring projects to CDFIs that do development lending? I would say we do that indirectly through our partners. So for example, Sinair, which is one of our partners, has a development company that does exactly that. They work with local developers to increase their capacity. They're working both in Wilmington and in Detroit right now to do exactly that. And there would be other situations where we would be very open to doing that. But we do not directly have that capacity or ability to provide those kinds of services. So Mark, I'm wondering if we want to pull up the questions from the event that we weren't able to get to. In particular, I would like you to address the question about what does the CDFI Fund think about CDFI Friendly?
So this is interesting, and I'm going to do a little background because not everybody may know about the CDFI Fund, but the CDFI Fund in the Department of the U.S. Treasury is a program that was created in 1994 to provide primarily equity financing to CDFIs so that they would be able to do more in their markets and in their communities. And it's been a tremendous, tremendous success and is a significant factor in the growth of the CDFI industry in this country. And one of the things that they identified all along, we've known all along, as CDFIs became really a national strategy of their own, and people, more and more banks look to them, more and more philanthropies look to them, more and more states and localities look to them, was that there were significant uncovered areas. And so what we defined as sort of the coverage issue was that there were areas that CDFIs were not able to cover, we're not able to provide, or we're not providing financing in, and there were lots of reasons for that. So, what the CDFI Fund did in its strategy, which it released in 2017, was include at the top of its list, the number one priority for the CDFI Fund was to figure out how to help existing CDFIs or established CDFIs expand their geographic coverage. And that, of course, is exactly what we're trying to do. We had started doing it in Bloomington about the time that they came out with this goal. And so right now the fund, the CDFI Fund, doesn't have any particular products or services targeting the CDFI friendly strategy, but it won't surprise me if in the long run it adds some products or encourages this kind of a strategy, because it is such a priority. It was just until we had started doing this in Bloomington, there wasn't anybody who had a sort of conscious strategy to try and achieve it. But we have met with folks at the CDFI Fund. They're very supportive of the concept of it. Like everybody else, they're waiting to see how it plays out. But I think that they think, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think they're encouraged by what we've been able to do so far and what's possible going forward. So CDFI Fund is supportive at this point.
So another question we have is, do you also provide help with CDFIs looking for capital?
So we are not in the business of helping CDFIs look for capital, but one of the things we've started to realize is, particularly as Bloomington has been successful and as more people have learned of the model, is that, that some investors are interested in finding CDFIs to invest in so that their certain markets could be covered. And so, you know, that in Bloomington, there were some financial institutions that did not, you know, had done a little bit of work with CDFIs, knew a little bit about CDFIs, but didn't have CDFIs to work with that were committed to working in their communities. And so we found that there's a little bit of that activity starting to pick up, and I think there'll be more. And at the national level, some of the large national CDFIs, large national investors, particularly the banks, but also the foundations now, are starting to take notice and starting to think about how they can support this kind of activity. So one of the things that we talked about last week at the Federal Reserve Bank event that Dan Latondra talked about from Bank of America is that when we set up Bloomington, CDFI Friendly Bloomington, Bank of America made a commitment of $10 million of 10-year money initially at 2% to CDFIs in equal dollar amounts to the financing they were doing in Bloomington. And so it was a very clear incentive for CDFIs to look at Bloomington, and because they wanted to encourage the model. And, you know, in essence, if they made a loan and they made it out off their balance sheet and they were getting, in effect, re-upped or reimbursed by Bank of America in an equal amount at 2%, or now we think it's going to be less than 2%, because of what market rates have done, then their balance sheet sort of gets better. They have 10-year low-cost money the next day. Now, Bank of America did that in Bloomington, has not yet committed in South Bend. I hope they will. We're still in the process of setting up the capital structure in South Bend because of the expansion next door to Elkhart County. But I think I think this is going to be proved to be, you know, promising for CDFIs that are looking for capital and that are looking to expand their geographies.
So we're just around 2:30, plus we got a question that's related to what we said we would talk about at 2:30. How are you matching CDFIs and community partners? How do you organize the initiative? So Mark, maybe you want to show those slides and walk us.
Here we go. Oop. Hold on one second. See if I can do this. Whoops, I'm gonna have to go out for 1 second, sorry. Stay with me fix
This
this.
is part of every Zoom. You have to have at least one moment like this.
Oops. All right. Here we go. Here we go. Coming back. All right. So we want to give you a sense of sort of the overall idea of what we're doing when CDFI Friendly America, the model we developed when we come into a community or when we talk to a community about what it takes to become a CDFI friendly community or city or town. And the most communities have, many communities have heard of CDFIs, but they don't necessarily know what a CDFI is or what it would mean for them. One of the things that those of us who've been in the CDFI industry for a long time know is that when CDFIs get involved, we've long said that CDFIs create their own demand because they have capital and flexibility in their capital and creativity and how they think about it. Doesn't mean that other financial institutions couldn't, but if you're a regulated institution, you have to work within a regulatory constraint and your own institution's credit box. So CDFIs tend to be more creative in how they think about what's possible. And so we want to bring all those folks together and really engage them in a conversation. The way we do that in the middle there is through this 4-stage process, which I'll explain in a little more detail. First, we go in and do an assessment, which is fairly brief. Then we go in and do an organizing and educating mode or phase, which is very intense and can take many months, 6-8 months at least. Then we do business planning, and that's based, as I'll explain, that's based on the organizing, the education, and the confidence that if we help them develop a business plan, that it's for good, it will come to a good end. And then to the extent that they need help, we help them with implementation. Some of that is routine, setting up a new nonprofit, but some of that is actually figuring out who to hire and how to structure the board and all that sort of stuff. And we hope that the end of that is a CDFI friendly community that helps to organize supply and demand in their market. So let me do this now in a little bit more detail. First thing I want to say, we organize this in 4 phases, and the way we handle it is that each phase has an exit ramp at the end of it, is probably the easiest way to say it. That if the community decides it's not the right thing for them, or they don't want to go forward, or they don't want to go forward right now, there's no obligation for anybody to continue. And we hope that whatever work we've done till then will be constructive in however they meet their financing needs in their communities and bring their communities together. But so first we do an assessment, and the assessment is not really that complicated, but we bring our expertise of what CDFIs do and what they can do and what we know about communities together. We gather data from existing data. Many communities have done some work or thought about financing needs, and sometimes that's not the city, not the municipal government. It may be the banks in the community, maybe community development corporations or community organizations. And so we do a set of interviews. Depends on where we're working and how large the community is, but in any given community, roughly 20, 25 interviews where we want to talk to people from all perspectives. If you went back to the last slide and looked at all the different interests, it could be corporate, it could be banking, it could be community, it could be community activists. We hope it's all of those if they're there. It could be civic leaders. It's a whole range of folks that we want to talk to, including CDFIs. If there are CDFIs that have worked there or have thought about working there, we want to get their input too as well. And really what we are after is really assessing the feasibility of a CDFI friendly strategy. We want to be able to say with confidence to whoever our client is, which might be the community foundation or the city or someone else, that we think that this could work here. We want to do more work on it, but we think it can work here. And here's what the opportunities are. Here are things we didn't know about that maybe you didn't know about, but that would really add to the potential for success. But also here are some of the challenges we found out about. And so, those can be all over the place. But so we'll do that. We give them the feedback. We sit down and talk with them, and they make a decision about whether they're ready to continue. That's roughly a 8-10 week process, give or take, from start to finish. Then if they want to continue, we call it educate and organize. One of the things we know about CDFIs, and if you've ever been in the CDFI world, is you need to explain about 1,000 times what a CDFI is and what it does. And so people need to understand that CDFIs are primarily in the business of lending or providing financial services in the case of credit unions, community development credit unions, and community development banks. they're not primarily grant-making institutions. Some of them do, most of them don't make grants. So there's a lot of iterative conversations that we have with everyone who has some role to play in what we're trying to help the community put together, explaining what CDFIs are, helping them envision how that might make a difference in what they're trying to do or what their community is trying to do. And at the end of the day, we want to do, and this is oversimplifying greatly, because we'll work at this for 6 or 8 months or more, is we want to really put together a coalition of folks who are advocates for and supporters of the idea of creating a CDFI friendly strategy, who see it, even though it's different for them, see it as adding to their work, making it possible for them to do things they weren't possible to do before, bringing in certain types of financing. And to that last point, we actually asked the community to develop a list of real CDFI deals we call deal sheets, which are things that they've wanted to get done, things that are on the drawing board, things that people have talked about that they have not been able to do for one reason or another, usually involving financing, almost always involving financing, or would require financing. And we use those deals then to bring together the people in the community with CDFIs from other places, comparable sorts of markets, bankers, national bankers who invest in CDFIs. And we have a sort of a conversation that either is or isn't sort of an aha moment when the community realizes, oh, you mean we could do that if we did that, right? And if we had a CDFI friendly community and CDFIs came to town, this would be possible because we've never been able to do it before. And one example of that was in a recent, one of the communities we worked in where, you know, the small business owners and their advocates just didn't believe that CDFIs would do the kind of flexible financing that they thought the communities needed. And they do, and it's happening. And so it's, you know, part of that is really working through what it would really mean. Again, if the community wants to go forward, and we hope by that point they're pretty committed to going forward, then we go in and do a business plan. And a business, lots of people have done business plans. We do, you know, comprehensive business plan. But the test of our business plan is that it's got to make sense to all sides in this. It's got to make sense to potential investors, foundations, the city, community activists, community groups, business owners, housing developers, everybody who's in that community. And so it's a very, very, again, iterative process where we take that business plan out and we test it again and again and again with individually and in groups with everyone to make sure that when we say we're done with the plan and the community feels like they're done with the plan, people are really ready to get involved. Because if not, if we develop a plan and no one wants to fund it or no one wants to invest in the enhancement fund that we create with it, and I'll say more about that in a second, then we don't have, you know, we've done nothing and we failed at what we're trying to do. So all along, we are trying to make sure that people understand what it would take and what the commitment is. Let me just for a second say a word about the enhancement fund. It was something that we developed when we were trying to figure out how to implement in Bloomington, where we realized that for CDFIs lending from who don't have an office in Bloomington or any in the town where we're talking about, one of the big risks is that they're lending from afar and they can't. A key part of monitoring for a CDFI is staying in touch with the business owner or the developer or whoever they're working with. And you know, and if they don't, then they'll find out the next month when the payment doesn't come in for the loan. And so the idea was to create a small local financing arm that would be under the control of the CDFI friendly entity that would invest and finance alongside the CDFI. It's not before the CDFI, and it's really just alongside. So they're in the same risk position as the CDFI, if it's in Bloomington and the CDFI is in Lansing, Michigan, as scenarios, then the CDFI knows that there's someone in Bloomington who's worrying about the same things that they are, and who, if they hear, for example, that a business owner has a life event, has to, you know, something happens to the business, something happens to the development, that they're going to call the CDFI right away. That we are leveraging the expertise of CDFIs in these communities, but in order to do that, the local community needs to have some risk. The other side of that, though, is that enhancement pool doesn't have to work in every deal, just in some deals. And the board of the CDFI friendly entity has the ability to, at its discretion, prioritize affordable housing over small business or nonprofits over market rate housing. And so it gives a local measure of control over the funds as well. So we may have some questions about that, happy to answer them. And then we stay with the entity that we've created through implementation. If, for example, in South Bend, we are now working on the regional strategy. So we want to stay through to help them make sure that that's all set up and working. We make sure the board's functioning. Hiring the executive director is probably the most important part of that. And we have some idea of what expertise and experience it takes to do that. The last thing I would say actually comes out in that last bullet there, which is that we are looking, from the moment we come to a town, we are looking to make CDFI connections. So if on the first day we're there doing the assessment, we learn about a deal and we think a CDFI could help, we'll make that connection from the very beginning, even, without having to set up all this, all the entity at the end of the day, and throughout the process. So one of the things that happens when we get through the second phase of educating and organizing, and we've identified deals, we look to the CDFIs and say, look, if there are any deals you're interested in now, move on them because they're available now. And so we're interested in making that financing work. We think that's a great success of the model. So anyway, let me pause there. And Adina, I haven't been watching the questions. Are there anything?
So Mark, there was one question about basically, so what does this all cost?
Yeah.
Then there were other questions about appropriate sizes of deals in terms of quote unquote real deals.
Yeah. So why don't I address the cost stuff up front? And it depends a little on the community that we're working in. We staged the cost of this. So the initial assessment is, none of this is cheap because it's very intensive work over a long period of time. We staged the assessment depending on the size of the community. For a single community, could be $15,000 or $20,000 or $25,000, just ballpark. And it depends on the community. It depends on how many people we need to talk to. It depends on past issues and whether there are things that have been tried there before that haven't worked, and so people have their, heels dug in, or whether in fact people are just, have always wanted CDFI financing capacity. So that's the first part. The rest of the process, and it depends a lot on the community, will probably cost another roughly $200,000 over 12 to 14, 16 months. And that's a lot of money, we understand. And like Bloomington did, they had to decide whether they wanted to put their money into creating their own CDFI or creating a CDFI friendly approach. What they decided was, if they created their own CDFI, they'd have a CDFI that had the ability to do one type of financing, which is great if they're good at it, but it's a learning curve for CDFIs, so it would take a while for them to get there. And they wouldn't be able to have affordable housing or commercial real estate or nonprofit facilities financing, which they also needed. But the other is that this is a goal. The goal of this is to spend of creating a CDFI friendly effort really is about leveraging investment from outside the community and having CDFIs from outside the community compete to do the financing in the community. And so, that's why it's so important to us when we say that Bloomington has been able to attract so far a little over $15 million from outside the community. That's new money into the community, and hopes to do a lot more. And same thing with South Bend, same thing with Elkhart, the other communities that we're talking to. And so communities have to decide that. And so one of the key parts of the business plan is being able to sort of, put everything into numbers, so that folks can decide if this is a smart investment for the community to make. It usually involves philanthropic, municipal, commercial, bank investment and support to make this go. So it's not a simple and easy thing, but the long-term bang for the buck, we think, in the right communities, the long-term bang for the buck is tremendous. So hopefully that answers questions. If you have more questions about cost, we're happy to try to answer them. And Adina, what was the other question?
So another question was about the size of the deals that we would develop as part of this package of quote unquote real deals to talk to CDFIs. And I guess I would answer that size is not what we mean by real. So you could have a small deal of just a couple $1,000s for a person to replace the boiler or the roof in their home, or for a facade, to bridge a facade grant. That was one of the things we were just about to do pre-COVID, was to create a program with Acción Illinois, Indiana, and the city of South Bend to bridge facade grants. until the city could disperse them. And then that got delayed because of COVID. But those would have been very small transactions, or they could be many, many million. In the case of the housing deals, the housing development deals in Bloomington, those were multiple million deals that had more than one CDFI in them and the enhancement fund. So it could be any level of complexity in between as well. So the real part is not about size. It's about, I guess, two things. One is that it's an actual transaction that somebody wants. And then the other thing is that it's a situation that's amenable to debt. Because what we have found out in many of the situations that people have wanted to, many of the problems that people have wanted to solve are really you need grants, not debt. And mostly CDFIs are not offering grants. In the past several months, CDFIs have done a ton of PPP loans, which are forgivable loans, but those were the exception to what normal CDFI activity is, which we're offering a loan that we expect to get repaid and then relend the money out again. That's part of the education process for many of the people in the community is what's the difference between a deal that needs debt and a deal that needs money that will never have to be repaid.
And part of what's real, it depends a lot on what the community identifies as its priority needs. And so one of the things that in South Bend, we identified two overarching needs. One is affordable housing, and particularly small dollar mortgage or modest dollar mortgage financing in a community that has a lot of appraisal issues where the houses don't appraise for lending reasons. And that was one of them. But the other one that really emerged, and it didn't emerge at first in South Bend, was lending to entrepreneurs of color who were not able to be competitive in city contracting because they simply didn't have the capital liquidity to be able to move and to be able to succeed at bidding. And so the community really decided that was an enormously important issue. And so a lot of those loans, as they get made, and some of those may be represented by some of the transactions that have already been done in South Bend, are not going to be big dollar loans, but they're big, important loans from a strategic perspective of the city. So that again, we don't try and drive that. We help the community sort of think through that and decide what's most important to it. And if in the process, somebody comes along, someone identifies a big business loan, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't try. We would of course try and find a CDFI that could do that if the banks weren't able to do it for any reason. So
I think there's a question that's tailor-made for you, Mark. Mm-hmm. Which books would you recommend to better understand CDFIs?
Well, let's see if I can think of one. I'm joking because I published a book last fall that covers CDFIs in part, not just CDFIs. And it's called Organized Money. There's always a copy on my desk. It's called Organized Money, and it was published by the New Press. And it was written really with the idea that the power of CDFIs and other, what I would think of as, impact investors and other investors, they have a tremendous amount of influence in a financial institution that they don't always use to try and make the financial system work better for the community development goals and other goals that we might share. So it's called Organized Money. And first off, my co-author is Keith Mestrich, M-E-S-T-R-I-C-H. So you can find his name on the book. But I'd love to hear from anybody who is interested in the book. So thank you for that. And there really are not a lot of other books. There's some other books that also touch on CDFIs. None of them particularly noteworthy. And there are no end of resources from the CDFI Fund to the CDFI Coalition to Opportunity Finance Network, where Adina and I both used to work, that have great resources on CDFIs. Inclusive, which is the network of community development credit unions, is a tremendous resource if you're interested in the work of credit unions. And so Community Development Bankers Association. We can share all these out. I don't mean to be rattling them off so fast, but there are great resources if you're interested in learning more about CDFIs. And if you write to us, we'll put it up later, but if you write to us at our email addresses, we'll make sure we get that to you.
So I think we've answered all the questions. Somebody asked about posting the recording of the webinar. That will be coming out shortly, and we will definitely make that available, that link available to everybody. We don't have it yet. They work their way through it and do little edits to get rid of the ums and the ahs. And
one other question, Adina, I don't think we got to, which is CDFI friendly regional or national. And from our perspective, we'll work anywhere in the United States where we think it can be effective. So it's not regional at all; it is national. And we are still. This is a journey we've set out at. We're incredibly encouraged by how it's working so far and by the level of interest we've heard about in this, which is how we came to share it with via the Federal Reserve Bank of New York with others who are interested in it. And we think it has a lot of potential that is a win for the communities, that is a win for the CDFIs, and is a win for the investors in the CDFIs. So, we're very optimistic about it. Are there any other questions? We have time, but we don't have to take it.
So Bria has posted in the chat our email address and how to join our mailing list. Feel free to do that if that's meaningful to you or if you want to stay in touch. We do not send out a gazillion emails, we promise. But we do try to keep people up to date on what's going on and what we're thinking about. So that's a great way to stay in touch. If you think your community is the one that might be interested in CDFI Friendly, also feel free to be in touch with either Mark or myself. And we will set up a time to talk. There's our contact information, both our email addresses and our website. We invite you to take a look at CDFIFriendlyAmerica.com. As we mentioned, you can sign up to get the white paper there. You can see our blog there. You can see some stories about the existing cities. And feel free to be in touch with either Mark or myself at any point if you think you want to pursue this or you have more questions or you can't remember what we said about something, any of the above.
And thank you for being here. I think Adina and I can stay on for a little bit if anybody has any last questions before you go, but we really want to thank you for taking time to learn a little bit more about the CDFI friendly model. We think that with COVID, with a lot of other things that are going on in this country, the recovery we need to go through, that CDFIs are going to play a really important role. And so what we hope is we can help the power of CDFIs reach into many, many more communities and many underserved and under-resourced communities than they can reach today, to the benefit of the CDFIs, the benefit of the communities, and the benefit of the nation. So thank you all very much.
Feel free to unmute if you want to have a conversation at this point.
Not all at once.
I have a question. Thank you, Mark and Adina, for this. I'm Cassie.
It's extremely hard to hear you. Could you put your volume up?
If you could just identify yourself, that'd be helpful.
Is this any better?
Yes, much better.
Perfect. Hi. Thank you, Mark and Adina. I'm Cassie Collier. I'm an employee at Deutsche Bank, and I'm part of a team that is working internally right now on an incubator program that is focused on how banks can be supportive of CDFIs. So I'm curious, Mark and Adina, from your perspective, how can banks really be of resource to CDFI Friendly America and to CDFIs in general?
So banks are a critical part of the CDFI friendly model in at least 2 or 3 ways that I can think of off the top of my head. The first is participating in the enhancement fund. The second is being a part of deals. There may be a bank portion, or there may be deals that banks can do directly that we can just refer to banks. And the third has been, banks have been really valuable in being part of the organizing committees and the boards of directors of CDFI Friendly America. So those are 3 that come to mind right away. They're also, during the whole business planning, organizing and business planning process, they give us a lot of insight into what can and can't happen in a given community, or what the mindset is among bankers, which that definitely influences what gets approved and what doesn't. So that the insights have been very, very helpful.
And I would add a few things to that. One is for local bankers or small regional bankers to have a national bank which has experience as Deutsche Bank does in working with CDFIs, to come in and say, this is how we think about it, and this is why we like to do it, why we think it's a good idea, does a tremendous amount for helping them to see it through a banker's eyes. So that's been important. We've done that in all the communities we worked in. The second is, if there are communities that you think would benefit, that you serve in, or that you're working in, that you think a CDFI is the right solution, but there's no CDFI, you've tried for years, that might be a community that you could refer to us, and we might be able to talk to you about how to sort of help make that happen. And the third is, you're talking about an Excel, I forget what you call it, but we one of the things that COVID did to us is we had to think about how do we work differently, because our model was going and spending a lot of time in South Bend, or spending a lot of time in Bloomington, or spending a lot of time in wherever, and that's not so easy to do anymore. And so we've really been rethinking our model and are developing sort of an accelerator model to work with cohorts of folks who are trying to work in CDFI friendly communities. It's not active now, but we'd love to talk to you about that if that's something that might fit with what you're trying to do. But we'd love to be a resource to you as well, as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark and Adina. We'll be in touch. Thanks for your responses on that.
Thank you.
Look forward to it. Anybody else have a question or a comment?
Yes, I have.
You identify yourself?
Hi, I'm Ken Franklin. I just had a quick comment. I apologize if I missed this earlier. Will this video be available for the participants to add, and any other information you have, any workshops that you might be doing virtually or maybe next year as well too on this topic?
Yes, the short answer is yes to all of that. We do keep a mailing list. We don't overload you with anything, but we'll certainly let you know when this video is available. Also, when the video of the event we did with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York is available, that we're sort of drafting off of here. But also as well, any other upcoming events, we'll certainly let you know, and we would love to have you join us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. Yes.
So hello, hi Adina.
Carol.
So good to see you. I'm a transplant from Philadelphia, here now in Florida, 10 years, and I have currently designed for my employer. I have a double head. I am the manager of entrepreneurial services for Hillsborough County, which is the largest county in the Tampa Bay area, as well as the center director for the Small Business Development Center at Hillsborough County as well. And so I've been tasked with setting up loan programs. And Adina, that's kind of in my alley, so I'm okay, I'm happy with that. And I think that there's a lack of CDFIs in our area, given that Tampa Bay area is very progressively for businesses and much easier to get in business, frankly, than where the market that I came from. However, there's not enough money to match that. So there's tons of people trying to start businesses and all those kind of things, but there's no money. So recently, maybe over the last several years, one of the credit unions, one of the largest credit unions in our area, became a CDFI. And they just, over the last 2 years, started a microloan program. And then there's another CDFI that does some lending, but only for minority businesses and really focusing around contracts. So right now I have 2 loan programs, one guarantee program, one loan program, and a self-employment training program being presented to my direct report to see how and I'm looking at getting financing from them. We're looking at the EPA, EDA, and then other, funding sources. A couple of the banks in the area right now is like a good time, if anybody doesn't know, to ask for money from banks. So particularly if you're focusing on disadvantaged communities. So I'm looking for that assistance, and I'll be looking forward to talking to you. So I'm really just saying, looking forward to talking to you all about how to be more strategic in doing what we're doing. It's something that the county wants to do, and having set these things up before, you can have your hands crossed, what's the proper term? You can set up these programs and then they still don't do the good that they're intended to do. And so we want to make sure that we you know, I want to make sure going in that we set in some things that make sure that it gets and accomplishes the goals, which is to focus on small businesses as a whole, but particularly for disadvantaged minorities and women-owned businesses.
And if I can, Carol, one of the things we've learned is that in communities where they, in fact, are plenty of CDFIs working there, they may not have a focus or the focus that you feel you need on, for example, that's what happened in South Bend. And so that's part of what, you know, a good design process is. There are CDFIs in Florida and serving that area, they may not have the products and services that you need. So that's part of what we look at when we do this. So thank you.
You all have worked with community, with a government.
Yes.
And so
we work with communities. Well, let's take this offline and have a longer conversation, Carol, just in case there are any other questions before we go. So,
very good. I would love to do that. Thank you.
Any last questions before we hit our 3 o'clock hour? Anyone? No?
Kimberly, are you wanting to ask something? You have that look. If you do, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
I think I'm unmuted. I wanted to get your perspective on those CDFIs that, like ours, I'm with Neighborhood Housing Services of South Florida. We're a CDFI, and we're focused on the mortgage side of things, residential lending. And I wanted to just get your take on CDFIs like us and how can we grow. We want to do more. We've done a lot, but we want to do even more to expand home ownership and also to expand the development of affordable housing units.
So Kimberly, that's kind of the other side of my business and Mark's business. We do CDFI Friendly part-time, and we do other kinds of consulting with CDFIs the rest of the time. So if you're interested, feel free to just reach out and we can talk about what we might be able to do to help with that challenge.
Okay. All right.
Well, I want to say thank you to everybody at this point. Thank you so much for those of you who stuck around till the end, and thank you for your attention and your curiosity. Like Mark and I have said a couple times, feel free to reach out and be in touch either by email or through the website. And we look forward to further dialogue about ways to get more patient capital into more places.